Okay, my name's Catherine Diani Sakopoulos. I have known Roy MacDonald since I was about 4 or 5 years old, but I didn't really know him. I remembered hearing about Roy MacDonald through my mother because she grew up in London and her parents owned the Casino restaurant, and it was a really hip, happening place, and it's where many locals used to go. And father owned it, and Roy would always go there for coffee, and he knew well my grandparents. And when my mother got married, she was very young. She was 21 years old, and I remember hearing the story that Roy MacDonald showed up for the wedding and he brought a gift. And I remember my mom telling me that the people at the wedding didn't really understand that Roy knew my mother, and they tried to kick him out just because they weren't sure. They didn't know him. They didn't know that he knew my parents and that he had known them for years. So until my mom realized what was going on, and she said, "No, this is my friend Roy."
What are you saying?
I'm telling him the story. This is my friend Roy. I've known him for so long. So
he get Roy in the footage.
Yes, I know.
Roy.
He ended up bringing a gift for my mother's wedding, and I remember my mom telling me the story, and I was scared because he was the bearded man that I never knew, that I would see downtown in London, and I was very intimidated just because he was an older man. I didn't trust many people as a little kid, so he was very mysterious to me until I had the courage to introduce myself. I was about 12 or 13 years old, and I saw him in McDonald's. He was sitting there having a coffee, looking at his newspapers, reading, I'm not quite sure. And I knew him from my mother and the story of her wedding, and I introduced myself. And the minute I introduced myself and told him who my mother was, he knew exactly who I was, and he ended up 2 minutes later bringing out a book, and he showed me passages, and my uncle was in it, my grandfather was in this book that he had written, and it was fascinating just because I never knew that past. I never knew the olden days of the Casino restaurant, and he seemed to have this knowledge that I only wished I could have had about the history of London and what life used to be like. And ever since then, I've been developing much of a closer relationship with Roy through history and getting to know. Getting to know him through the generation. He's so much more energetic than most people I know at his age, and he's such a lovely person, and he's just wonderful, and I love knowing him, and I love being close to him. And I'll never forget that time Roy and I went to Tim Hortons for coffee, and we just spilled our guts out and shared everything. And he told me stories, and then I ended up reading his book that he wrote. I forget what it's called, but it was like I knew him based on what he had written 20 years before, but I could also understand how he's changed at that time because he shared how he's changed since the time he wrote the book and what he's learned through the 20 years since he had written the book. And it was just fascinating stuff, and he's a wonderful person, and I love him so much.